Welcome to the No Sugarcoating Podcast. I am Amber Romaniuk, emotional eating, digestive, and hormone expert. I am also the founder of amberapproved.ca. I support professional women achieve optimal health through mindful eating, self-care, and overcoming self-sabotage with food. This podcast provides the honest truth on what you really need to create body freedom. The No Sugarcoating Podcast provides information on healthy living, lifestyle changes, nutrition, and diet, and is intended for informational purposes only. Always seek the advice of your healthcare practitioner regarding your health and nutrition program. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 173. This week, I am talking about identifying your food rules, exploring how food rules fuel self-sabotage, and taking your power back from food. So I'm going to dive right into the show notes because I want to just cruise right into today's topics. They're just so juicy that I can't wait to get into them. So the show notes for today's episode can be found at amberapproved.ca/podcast/173. Friendly reminder to subscribe to the No Sugarcoating Podcast on all podcast apps. Of course, it's the one with the photo of yours truly. You can click the link in the show notes as well. You can listen to all episodes at amberapproved.ca/podcast. Are you really, truly ready to be done with emotional eating? Are you ready to learn how to build confidence and a healthy relationship with your body? Gain energy, eliminate stressors, build a happy digestive system, balance your hormones, have freedom from cravings, and of course, build a healthy relationship with food and with yourself. Perhaps you're saying, I know what I need to do, it's just that I'm not doing it. Well, what does it cost you financially, emotionally, and physically to continue to not take action, or to keep taking the same actions and keep getting the same results and driving yourself crazy? I often find it costs people a lot less physically, emotionally, and financially to take a unique approach that will provide you with the transformation that you are seeking with your health and your relationship with food and your body. And the best part is you don't have to diet, calorie count, or do anything extreme. So I'm offering my self-love savings on my 1 year and 6 month coaching programs, and this offer ends next week. So be sure to email me at info@amberapproved.ca with the subject line coaching sale to book your complimentary 30-minute body freedom call to talk more about how getting support can help to have a positive impact in all areas of life, including with your relationship with food and your body. Again, that's info@amberapproved.ca with the subject line coaching sale. Make sure you enter the worldwide giveaway that I've been talking about over the last few weeks. If you want all the details for that giveaway, you can read in the show notes below, and that will give you the instructions. So to enter the giveaway, leave a review and a 5-star rating if you like, and I will share the instructions on how to give a review shortly, and what is included in the giveaway as well is in the show notes below. So good luck to everyone. You still have a couple of weeks to enter. And if you're wondering if you're struggling with emotional eating, be sure to check out a couple of gifts I have on my website. So I have an emotional eating quiz as well as an emotional eating video series. So you can check both of those out by clicking the links below in the show notes to get some more insight if you're struggling, and if you're wanting to have a better understanding of why you may be struggling and why it may be wonderful for you to reach out and get support. Last but not least, make sure you are following me on Instagram at Amber Romaniuk, as this is where I share lots of health tips, emotional eating inspiration, recipes, Instagram stories, and I'm going to be sharing a load of new content now that it's March. So I'm really excited to share all sorts of new things with you. So if you want to leave a review to support the podcast, leaving a review and sharing what you're learning in the podcast, how it's inspiring you, how it's helping you, it really allows others to understand what this podcast is about. And it is a great way to support me if you're enjoying what you're hearing. So if you want to leave a review, you can do so on your phone or computer by going to podcasts and searching for the No Sugarcoating Podcast. Even if you're subscribed to me, you'll need to find the show in this way. And once you're on my main page, you can click on reviews, write a review in purple, give me 5 stars if you're like, and write a little something, or you can go to amberapproved.ca/review and it will take you to the page where you can follow the steps that I've just shared. If you have questions, you can submit them to nosugarcoatingpodcast@gmail.com. I please ask that questions are no more than 150 words in length, as health histories do need more support and private coaching would probably be a better fit. If you're finding you're struggling with a specific eating style and you're struggling with emotional eating or food addiction, digestive issues, inflammation, hormone imbalances, cravings, your self-care continues to be at the bottom of your list, and you really struggle to make yourself a priority, and you're fighting with your body and your weight, well, you're in the right place, my friends, because these are all of the topics and habits that I will continue to explore, diving into the mindsets and habits to set you on a different path. Amber Approved offers private coaching for hormonal imbalances, weight loss and digestive issues, emotional eating, and more. Contact Amber at amberapproved.ca to book your 30-minute complimentary consultation today. So let's talk about food rules, because I used to have loads of food rules. I know there's a lot of eating styles and diets that have a lot of food rules. People create their own food rules depending on the relationship that they have with food. And so I really wanted to talk about this today and how food rules can have a negative impact on your health journey and how they can fuel diet mentalities and panic and fear and anxiety around food. So do you have food rules? Do you say there's certain foods I can't eat? I shouldn't eat that. I'm not allowed to eat that. That's not part of this diet or this eating plan. If I eat that, I'm going to gain weight. If I eat that, it's going to mess everything up and ruin my progress. Or maybe it's in fact that you have food rules because you're scared of certain foods, depending on, if something or someone says, I can't have this food, it's going to make me gain weight, or I shouldn't have this because otherwise I won't experience the success on this diet. And then what ends up happening is you feel like you have to be perfect with your diet or your eating style in order to achieve the weight loss. It's usually weight loss that people are trying to achieve, or maybe it's balanced digestion. I do know a lot of people that struggle with, quite severe digestive issues, and then they feel better by, going through certain processes, and then they fear or feel like they have to have certain food rules because they don't want to go back to the pain and the suffering that they're experiencing. And I really think that, when we work through and if we, take the time to go through, the protocols and do things properly and also shift the mindset and build a healthy relationship with our body, that we shouldn't have to have a bunch of food rules and shouldn'ts and can'ts around food. So I really think that there's been a huge evolution of food fears and food rules, especially in the last few years, especially as of recent. And part of that is with a lot of these fad eating styles that have come up, social media. Everyone wants to be an influencer and share how this eating style or diet has helped them to lose the weight. But what a lot of people aren't sharing is how easy is it to maintain? Do they have eating disorders, or are they struggling with now food rules and food fears, and how much did they have to restrict, and how realistic is it to live a certain way with all these food rules? So to me, it's just not a healthy relationship with food to have all these food rules. So I have a question for you, and I want you to take a moment to reflect upon this. And it's really to use whatever food for you feels like a food that you are afraid of losing control with, or that you crave all the time. So essentially, when you hear the word cookie, or maybe it's bag of chips, or maybe it's chocolate or candy or ice cream or cheese, whatever your thing is, but when you hear your favorite food word, how does it make you feel? What comes to mind for you? Do you feel guilty all of a sudden? Do you feel fear? Do you feel panicky, right? Do you tense up in your body? Do you feel excited, right? Or do you think about the last time you ate that food and that you completely lost control, and that makes you feel shame, embarrassment, sadness? And I ask you this and take some time, pause the podcast and reflect upon this, because I'm asking because I work with so many different clients, and many of them have different relationships with food, as I'm sure you all do as well, and as well different food fears and different rules. So I've seen a spectrum of food fears and rules that include, fears around baked goods and cookies, candies, chocolate, pizza, fast food, cheese, sugar, more refined foods. And I've also seen a new group of food fears and food rules emerge that are being formed around some of the restrictive diets that I was mentioning earlier, and fad eating styles that are just big right now, keyword fad. So now people are creating rules and food fears around carbs, things like carrots, apples, bell peppers, healthy carbs, veggies, fruits, nuts, nut butters. People fear nuts and nut butters. I used to be one of them. When I was in my food addiction and I had cut out wheat, sugar, dairy, but I was still binging, I really had a cycle of probably 3 or 4 months where I severely lost control with nuts and nut butters. So essentially I would go to the store, buy a big bag of cashews or almonds or trail mix, and I could literally eat the whole bag, and of course I would feel sick afterward. Same with nut butter. I recall many scenarios where I would go to the store and I would buy a jar of natural peanut butter and like 10 bananas and eat it all at once, or apples and nut butter, or just the nut butter and eat the nut butter and feel so sick afterward because, of course, a couple tablespoons is okay, but when we're eating a whole jar of nut butter, that is a huge stressor on the body. So for me, part of my food rules was I can't have those 3 words I can't have. And then it was like, I can't have nut butter or nuts in the house. I can't have sugar. I can't have any baked goods. I can't bake. I'm not allowed to have any of these foods because I'm afraid of them and they make me feel vulnerable and they trigger me to emotionally eat. And so it's not that all of a sudden I want you to have all your trigger foods in your house and I want you to feel extremely vulnerable around food. No, that's not what I'm meaning at all. It's that with this epidemic of food fears and food rules, to me, if this is something that you're struggling with and you really fear food and you feel so vulnerable around it and there's certain things you can't have in your house, or you are really sticking to, oh, well, I did keto and they said this, so I need to incorporate these food rules and I have to follow that, or, well, I'm, doing, high protein, so I have to make sure I eat this much protein every day, and if I don't, I'm a failure. It's like there's a rule and there's some disempowering thought attached to it. So if you don't follow it, it's like you have tied your self-worth to that rule. And by not achieving and abiding by that rule, now you're not good enough and you're judging yourself and you're getting hard on yourself and you're beating yourself up. When a lot of these quote unquote rules are very restrictive and unrealistic and they don't allow any space for you to be human. But because there is such a desperation and such a want and need to lose a certain amount of weight, to fit in, to feel good enough, to feel worthy, people are bringing in all these food rules and not addressing their food fears. And instead, the list of food fears and rules is getting bigger and what's left on your plate is getting smaller. And this is an epidemic, right? I know people who make up that they have food sensitivities because there's certain foods that they lose control with. And so they don't have to try to explain to anybody that they have, an eating disorder or emotional eating or food addiction. They just go, well, I'm sensitive to all these foods, so I can't eat these. And so they're using that as a cloak to hide behind instead of dealing with the emotional eating or dealing with the food addiction. And there's no shame in that. But, when we have to make things up for fear of losing control, I think that's just like a huge sign that it's time to get help and support to overcome those struggles, because the more we focus on rules and the more we give our power away to food, the less out of power we are and the more the ego takes over and the more restricted we feel. And then when we have an overwhelming day where something really stressful happens, it's like this switch flips. And we go way over to the other extreme, which is the binging, the emotional eating, the losing control. And that is upsetting and frustrating. And then it's like from there we panic more because, maybe weight gain happened. Or maybe you're just like, oh my gosh, I lost control again and I can't afford for that to happen. So then what ends up happening is all of a sudden you're adding more rules in. You're thinking I need to restrict even more, when that's not the case at all. It's really not the case. So what I often find is the underlying fear or fears behind the food rules and the food fears is a fear of gaining weight. People say to me all the time, I don't want to gain any more weight. I don't want to get fat, right? They say, I need to look a certain way to feel good enough. And once I lose this weight, then I'll be happy, or then I'll go on that trip, or I'll start my business, or I'll go and date. So it's, again, as I've talked about before, people limiting their lives because of the fact that they don't like the way their body looks. So rather than going inside and focusing on how you feel, and what can kind of seem like a double whammy is if you don't feel good in your body physically because, say, you're bloated, you're tired, just feel heavy. I mean, that doesn't feel good. And then you pile on top of that the fear, the insecurity, the desperation, the not feeling good enough. That can be a lot. That's a lot to have weight on your shoulders. And it can get overwhelming and it can feel very uncomfortable, but piling a bunch of rules and food fears on top of that only just kind of pushes you to the extreme more and more. So it's really about, asking the question is this a healthy relationship with food? I don't think it is. So what this is about is examining the rules and the fear. Why do you have the rules with food that you do? Why are you afraid of the foods that you're afraid of? And what normally is below the fear of losing control with your body or the food rules is not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, people pleasing, perfectionism, all or nothing mindsets. I see this all the time. And this is truly at the core of so many people's health, weight, and food related struggles. It was at the core for me. It's at the core of every person I work with. And that's because essentially we're using food to shove down our emotions, to suppress feeling, to procrastinate, to have us avoid dealing with different scenarios. And that costs us a lot of money to spend on all the diets and the trainers and the quick fixes that don't work and all the programs that you don't do anything with. It costs you emotionally, big time. And it costs you physically. It costs you your health, suffering, physical symptoms that just seem to be getting worse, or they're not going away, or maybe you're continually noticing there's a new symptom, or maybe you're having to be on a bunch of prescriptions, or you're taking a billion supplements, but nothing is working because you're not taking the time to get to the root of why you're feeling the way you do and why you're behaving the way that you do with food, which largely is mindset. Because one of the biggest things that I learned on my food journey and that I teach to my clients is that it's not the food that's the enemy. It's not the food. It's our mindsets. It's our behaviors and our relationships with ourselves. It's our relationship with food. It's that we've chosen food as the coping mechanism, just like some people choose alcohol, some people choose shopping, some people choose sex and drugs that are very dangerous and that can end your life. There are definitely more extreme means. And I think food, whilst perhaps, the symptoms aren't as severe sometimes, over the long run, we can create a lot of health imbalances and serious potential dis-ease if we do not address and deal with our mindsets and unhealthy relationships with food and these restrictive food rules and food fears. So I used to blame food all the time. I always would say, it's because of the food, or it's because this food was in the room, or this person, upset me. And so I wanted to go and eat that food. And it was really about, learning to understand that I need to take responsibility because I'm going to go places where there's going to be certain foods in the room. And I want to get to the point where I don't fear those foods or give my power away to them or lose control. And I really noticed I'm not very good at coping with stress. So I really want to work on understanding how I can cope with stress and manage stress in more healthy ways instead of just eating. And that really helped me to identify how all my food rules and my food fears were actually a trigger for me, and they are actually triggering more self-sabotage. And that brings me to my second point. The No Sugarcoating Podcast is proud to partner with Dr. Segal's Energy Socks. Dr. Segal's makes fashionable compression socks for the effective relief of tired, achy, swollen legs. Visit drsegals.com and choose from a variety of styles. Dr. Segal's compression socks are truly socks with benefits. So I remember when I was struggling with my food addiction, and at the time I was working at a health-related clinic, and they were like, oh, you want to do some testing? You have these different symptoms. We suggest you do a candida test. And so I did the test, and the response came back that my candida was the worst that the doctor had ever seen in her 12 years of business. And it didn't surprise me because I was a sugar addict and I was binging on sugar all the time. I'd had to take countless antibiotics. I was highly stressed out. So here I am with this massive candida overgrowth, which is unhealthy bacteria overgrowth in your large intestine. And it makes you crave sugar and it makes you crave carbs. Low energy, brain fog, it has a negative impact on your hormones, makes you feel puffy, inflamed. You definitely have more sensitive digestion. There's a lot of symptoms, and I find a lot of the clients that I work with end up having gut flora imbalances as well. And we work through those things. These things can all be worked through, but there's a mindful way to navigate them. And then there's a sabotaging way to navigate them. And that's why I always encourage, if you're working with someone and they're making you feel restricted and they're not taking into account your food addiction or your emotional eating, and they're telling you you have to eat perfectly, those are all red flags for me. And I find those are all things that can trigger people to go deeper into sabotage with food. So you may want to look to either share your emotional relationship with food and ask them to take a different approach with you, or you may want to find a different person to work with that feels safe with you and that you can work with more on their level, that the recommendations are not so extreme. Because if the person doesn't understand or can't relate to you, some of the recommendations some people can make are very extreme. And so my experience was very extreme. And it was not the doctor's fault. It's the fact that I didn't exactly know that I was struggling with a food addiction at the time. I was too embarrassed to tell anybody, and I was desperate to find or figure out ways to stop the binge eating. So essentially, one of my biggest food rules that I created for myself was I was told, if you want your candida to balance, you can't have fruit, you can't have any beets or sweet potatoes or starchy vegetables, no gluten-free grains. So it's essentially like all you can eat is green vegetables, peppers, broccolis, like low carb vegetables, proteins, mold-free nuts. And so here I was like making green smoothies with like celery and cucumber and this god awful rice protein and like some cinnamon and nutmeg. Like that's all I could put in it. Eating Brazil nuts and like loads of green vegetables and protein. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to psych myself up and do this. And like, here's all my food rules. Here's all the foods I can't have. I need to take these certain supplements and I have to do this. They're like, you have to do this for the next year. And I was like, wow, that's a really long time. But I was trying to psych myself up and like get myself into that I could do this. And of course, not realizing how it may be a huge trigger for my food addiction. So I got started into it and I felt absolutely awful. My skin was turning yellow. I was like, all this junk was coming up out of my lungs. I was exhausted. I had no memory. I would like go to put something somewhere and forget what I was doing. I had such bad brain fog. I was so puffy and so sluggish and felt nauseated and like I had a cold. So essentially what was happening was because I had so extremely changed the way I was eating and I was taking all these antifungals to kill the yeast, my body was giving me a highly extreme detoxification reaction. And this was not okay. But I was being advised that this was just part of the protocol. And so one of the things that I inherited as I realized that this was far too extreme for me, because it kept triggering me to go back into binge eating, and then I'd eat all the sugar and all the baked goods and mess up my progress, and then I'd bounce back and do the candida protocol for a while. But I kept essentially telling myself, well, I can't eat sugar. I can't eat anything with natural sugar. I can't eat fruit or it's going to feed the yeast. So I got to the point where it was so extreme based off of the yeast recommendations that I was going, I can't even have fruit or it's going to feed the yeast. And that was very limiting because I loved fruit. Like I love apples and berries and pineapples and bananas and all different kinds of things. And I was just feeling so restricted. I didn't look forward to eating because my food tasted so awful. So one of the biggest things I learned is I identified I had a food addiction and, started to take steps to overcome that, is I need to stop the restrictive candida protocol that I was being advised with. I need to overcome my emotional eating first, and then I will revisit a much revised protocol that is not restrictive, that I don't feel like I'm going to lose control, and that I feel like I can pick away at my own time. And as I did that, as the time came, I took my rules away, but having the rule of I can't eat certain foods and it has to be all or nothing, otherwise I'm not going to get the results, it fueled self-sabotage, it fueled triggers. And then I was thinking anytime I ate fruit or I ate something that I wasn't supposed to have on that protocol, I'd get nervous, I'd get anxious, I'd think, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be eating this, and then it would make me bloated because I was having a fight or flight reaction. And I see this with clients, how they'll come to me and go, oh, well, Amber, I was told I'm not supposed to have carbs after 7 o'clock. Amber, I was told that I'm not supposed to have anything that isn't organic. Amber, I was told, that I shouldn't be having oatmeal or I shouldn't be having quinoa. And then when they think about potentially eating these foods, there's a reaction, there's an anxiety, a panic, a fear that is there because let's face it, when we challenge the ego and challenge what is so deeply ingrained within us, we have a fear around it, and there can be that fear of gaining weight or losing control, and that is a very sabotaging way to approach building a healthy relationship with food. So I think one of the most important things to explore is, again, understanding, make a list of your food rules. What do you not allow yourself to have? What do you say, I can't have this, I fear this diet or eating style doesn't allow me to have these foods, I'm not allowed to eat after 6 p.m., I'm not supposed to have potatoes or sugar or whatever it is. And yes, there may be certain foods that you feel more vulnerable toward. So there, for some people, and including myself for a period of time, I did have to avoid refined sugar for a while and dairy because I was severely addicted to them and I would lose control even with a small amount. I had to do the deeper emotional work to get to the point where I felt confidence around food and where I had no food rules and no food fears. That took time. And I can't stress enough that overcoming your food rules and your food fears, it takes time. And I say that to empower you, because if you try it for a week and it doesn't work, I don't want you to beat yourself up. I don't want you to lose hope, and I don't want you to be hard on yourself. I want you to take the time that you need for your health journey, and I want you to give yourself at least a year. Regardless of the journey you go on, and if you go on it on your own or you get help, give yourself at least a year, because it takes time to shift the mindsets and the patterns and behaviors that you've created up until this point. And it's going to take time to build awareness around those and what fuels them, and to undo those and to create new, healthier, more mindful patterns, behaviors, and habits that are more supportive, more balanced, more realistic, more human, right? That have more flexibility and more flow. So make a list of your food rules. Make a list of your food fears. Do you have a lot of them? How does it make you feel to see them? Do you think, oh my gosh, I'm feeling a bit ashamed or embarrassed, or no, I need to have these rules to have control? Well, let me tell you, it's not about having control with food. It's about building a mindful relationship with food. The only reason we feel like we need to have control with food is because we have an underlying fear, again, of losing control. And what's below the fear of losing control? The fear of gaining weight and the feeling of not being good enough. That is so at the core of all of this. And it is so profound to me that it's a belief of not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough, that is fueling all this self-sabotaging behavior with extreme weight loss and extreme exercise and extreme eating styles and emotional eating and food addiction and eating disorders and this unhealthy relationship you have with food and your body. It is a belief that is at the core of all of this. And it is by supporting the physical and emotional that you shift the root, the core, that limiting belief, and you fill the void. Food rules will not fill the void. Restricting diets, crazy weight loss approaches and obsessing about weight loss, that's not going to fill the void. That's not going to make you feel good enough. It's about taking a completely different approach and exploring how food rules may fuel self-sabotage. Food rules and food fears are emotional eating triggers. I see this all the time and used to experience this myself. So it is really about identifying your rules. And if you put a lot of them on yourself, well, why? Is it because you have a fear of losing control? Is it because you can't, for the life of you, afford to gain another pound because your clothes aren't fitting and you feel so ashamed and you're isolating and it's overwhelming and it's emotionally exhausting, to be honest, when you're in that place, right? But why do you put all these rules upon yourself? And how can you take your power back from food, which is my third point? I think the first step is identifying and just admitting, I am struggling with emotional eating, and I do tend to go towards diets and extreme quick fixes because I want things to change quickly. I want to lose the weight quickly. And it's just to surrender to that and admit that. And it's all to also say, you know what? I don't take enough time for myself. My schedule is overbooked. I have no white space for me. And when I look at my schedule, it makes me want to cry and it makes me want to go to the freezer and grab the pint of ice cream and eat it all because it's overwhelming as heck, right? Maybe you feel guilty thinking about taking the time to take care of yourself. Maybe you feel guilty saying no to others, right? All of this is part of this relationship with food. And as you explore the possibility of taking your power back, there's a few key things to explore. First is your list of food rules and food fears. Next, it is really about, do I seriously consider getting support? I support my clients with this stuff every day, and the transformation that they achieve by going on this process is absolutely amazing. If you take on the actions and recommendations and you're open to the coaching, you will get the transformation you seek. It happens in different periods of time for everybody, and it's to honor your journey. So take advantage of the coaching sale. Email me at info@amberapproved.ca and let's have a really wonderful conversation about what's possible for you by taking a different approach. Look at your schedule. I can't stress this enough. I talk about schedules often on my podcast, and it's because it's important for us to block off time for ourselves, to schedule off sacred self-care time, to have white space for yourself. Have some in the morning, have some in the evening. Book small check-ins through your day to check in with yourself, right? I challenge you to stop the diets, end the quick fix mentality, and make small changes. Start with more water every day. Start with incorporating more veggies. Maybe you're noticing you're barely eating any protein or you're barely eating any fat. Maybe you decided at one point you can't eat fruit. So maybe you start with an apple or berries or just something that you feel safer with. But it's about actually adding a bit more in of the good nourishment and stopping the restriction. Take time to sit and eat your food slowly and mindfully. This helps you build connection with food. This helps you build a healthy relationship with food. Your blood sugar is more balanced. Your cravings calm down. This supports your energy levels, your mood, and it allows you to feel more satiated and satisfied, and you're going to be far less likely to be triggered to binge or emotionally eat later. This is not about the food. This is about your mindset and the way you behave and the way you cope with stress and the way you behave with your body. And so if you're in a negative self-talk with your body regularly and your belief is that the only way I'm going to be happy is if I lose the weight, well, then this is something we definitely would want to work on shifting, because the more weight focused you are, the more food rules people often have and the more food fears people often have, because we get into just such a restrictive place that we feel stuck. So those are some of my recommendations for today. I'm definitely going to continue this conversation on in another podcast. If you're resonating with this, take this on, listen to the podcast again, take notes, bring a recommendation into your day. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to have a conversation and explore support. So the show notes for today's episode can be found at amberapproved.ca/podcast/173. As I always say, there's no better time than the present to take action on your health. So take action now. Have a wonderful day and a great week. And I will look forward to sharing a whole new podcast with you next week. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe, review, and rate this podcast and share it with your friends. You can find me at amberapproved.ca and follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Amber Romaniuk. Join me next Sunday for another brand new episode and another step toward body freedom.